Bringing you an update on the Vince McMahon lawsuit. This stems from allegations made by Janel Grant that during her time with WWE, she was the victim of assault, abuse, and trafficking. Then she is suing WWE, Vince McMahon, and John Laurinaitis. We'll bring you up to date on what we know. This week, Vince McMahon's legal team responded to Janel Grant's legal team filing a motion to strike Vince McMahon's preliminary comments. These were part of McMahon's motion to compel arbitration and submitted on the 23rd of April. Grant's team contends that Vince McMahon used the motion to strike as a tool to spread inflammatory lies and, quote, as a platform to launch vicious falsehoods, attacking Janel's moral character in an attempt to harass and intimidate her into submission.
Now, McMahon's team has responded to this and referred to Grant's motion as, quote, meritless and the height of hypocrisy, having falsely accused the defendant in a public forum despite an obligation to arbitrate in an inflammatory 67-page complaint that completely disregards the mandate of Rule A2 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. The plaintiff now seeks to strike the preliminary statement of the Memorandum of Law in support of the defendant's motion to compel arbitration on the purported basis that it is too inflammatory. That's their response to Janel Grant there.
It continues saying, ignoring her obligations to keep the nature of their relationship or the dispute private, the complaint unnecessarily includes private text messages from the defendant without including any of the plaintiff's responses to those texts. Responses which are equally and more aggressive and provocative than the defendant's communications and show not only that the relationship was consensual, but also that in many instances, the plaintiff was the initiator.
It also goes on to say that Janel Grant's replies to the alleged text to Vince McMahon would refer to him as, quote, the love of her life, and would detail fantasies about aggressive romantic encounters and mention some of the presents and the financial gifts that she'd received from Vince during what is, by this response, an alleged consensual relationship. So we'll have to wait and see what more comes out there.
When it comes to this, the reason that this is particularly been kicked up again the last couple of weeks, it comes because Janel Grant and her legal team want to take this into a public court. And Vince McMahon and his legal team are arguing that private arbitration was part of the agreement that was made between the two. And Vince McMahon's new statement of material facts that was published this week by his attorneys supports this. Vince McMahon's attorneys filing this statement in support of his motion to compel arbitration say defendant believes the material facts stated below are undisputed and conclusively resolve the forum dispute before the court. Should the court find it necessary to conduct a hearing on any issue, defendant respectfully reserves his right to introduce additional evidence that bears on witness credibility, sophistication, state of mind, and similar issues.
Now, according to the filing, McMahon and Grant ended a 3-year relationship that ended in January 2022. When the relationship ended, a, quote, confidential settlement agreement was agreed to, and Grant herself apparently negotiated the monetary compensation that McMahon offered from $1 million up to $3 million before involving their attorneys in the case. Janel Grant's attorney oversaw the compensation negotiation in January 2022 and revised the agreement, and this is what that says.
In the event of any disputes arising under or out of this agreement, its construction, its interpretation, its application, its performance, or breach, the parties agree to first attempt to resolve such disputes informally and prior to taking any formal legal action to resolve such disputes. In the event that any such dispute cannot be resolved informally, all parties hereto agree that the sole and exclusive legal method to resolve any and all disputes and or controversies is to commence binding arbitration under the Federal Arbitration Act pursuant to the procedures of the American Arbitration Association, and to do so by sealed proceedings which preserve the confidential and private nature of this agreement. The parties agree to discuss the venue for any such arbitration proceeding if and when such a dispute arises, which cannot be informally resolved. But in the event of the parties cannot agree on a venue, then the exclusive venue for any arbitration proceeding shall be Stamford, Connecticut. The prevailing party, as determined by the arbitration tribunal, shall be entitled to recover from the non-prevailing party all of its attorney's fees and costs.
It goes on to say, in the event that any provision of the agreement is held to be void or unenforceable by an arbitration panel or court reviewing an arbitration decision, the remaining provisions shall nevertheless be binding, provided, however, if any of the confidentiality obligations of this agreement are ever contended to be unenforceable by Janel Grant or are found to be unenforceable by any tribunal. Grant agrees that she shall return all monies paid pursuant to this agreement of McMahon.
So the basics on this is we're not even now talking about the case itself. We're not getting into the nitty and the gritty of the case. This is merely two sides going back and forth on how the case will proceed. Yeah. Janel Grant wants it as a public court, which I think a lot of people have called for. Vince McMahon to stand in a public court and face his allegations. But Vince McMahon and his team have said, well, actually, from the moment that we set out that initial agreement in January of 2022, we agreed that should this all fall by the wayside and all fall apart, we will go with private arbitration, which keeps it out of the public eye.
And it seems very much like, it seems very obvious why Vince would want that. It seems like a safer procedure for him. It seems like something that might avoid him jail time, even if he is found to be guilty. But Dave Meltzer has come out and revealed another reason as well why Vince would desperately want to keep this out of a legal court and in the court of arbitration instead.
Yeah, this was talked about on Wrestling Observer Radio, and this is a really interesting take on things. They need to rehabilitate his image enough to where he can do business as a businessman, because that's what he wants to do, whether it's wrestling, which apparently from what I'm told, it's not wrestling, but he absolutely wants to do this. He wants to not have his name out there in a bad light, and Dave Meltzer even says here, he doesn't want to be Harvey Weinstein. The only way he can do that is to basically make it look like and portray it as this, quote, crazy lying woman, and I absolutely had an affair with her, but all that stuff that she said, every single bit of it, is not true except for the text messages. The reason you say that is you can't argue the text messages. So this is basically by having it behind the door and away from the public eye, is that should Vince McMahon, and it sounds like he wants to get back into doing business again, it's a way of keeping some face and maintaining a reputation at the other side of it.
Which would be surprising in any other case, because you'd think that someone would, in this situation, if they're doing what Vince has done here and these choices and trying to keep it out of one type of court and into the arbitration, you'd think that was purely for self-preservation. But he's doing it not only in self-preservation, but also, oh, well, I've got business stuff to deal with later on and I need my reputation. It would be crazy, but it's Vince McMahon. He never stops.
No, that is that. There is an element of, when it comes to a private court for either side, there is an element of controlling the narrative in such a way, which is why certainly with Vince McMahon, there is a keenness to do so. For Janel Grant, it's more a case of putting it into a public court. Definitely one we'll keep an eye on. WWE themselves filed a memorandum on this in the last few days, and they are actually supporting Vince McMahon's motion to compel arbitration. In the filing, they say WWE disputes Grant's allegations, but as a threshold matter, this dispute cannot be heard in a court because Grant agreed to arbitrate her claims. WWE therefore moves to compel this action to arbitration.
The filing from WWE goes on to say, simply put, Grant has no claims actionable in this court because the separation and non-disclosure agreement she signed with McMahon and WWE, the monetary benefits of which she concededly accepted and retained, contains an arbitration provision that unambiguously precludes this court from adjudicating her claims.
The agreement, which Grant concedingly negotiated, signed, and accepted the benefits of, contains a clear and unambiguous arbitration provision. The provision requires not only that all claims Grant asserts here be decided in arbitration, but also that the threshold question of the arbitratability, of those claims be decided by an arbitrator. The court should grant WWE's motion to compel arbitration and order that the claims proceed to arbitration as the parties intended, as the agreement requires. Take a shot every time you hear the word arbitration.
Now, so basically WWE are siding with Vince as their co-defendant, saying that they would also rather this be decided in arbitration. And I remember a couple of weeks ago when it was announced that WWE were kind of agreeing with Vince on some dates and stuff, that the stuff had to be all decided by before it went to court. I remember thinking, wow, that's strange that they've on screen tried to distance themselves so severely from Vince McMahon. But here behind the scenes, they seem to be siding with him in terms of the court of law as his co-defendant. And I was quite surprised by that. But then I think you or somebody else pointed out, well, if they go against Vince, that is kind of admitting that there's a lot that needs to be looked into within WWE as well in terms of the culture and all that sort of stuff.
It's a far bigger issue, and it's one that we will absolutely keep an eye on. And for the very latest on the Vince McMahon, Janel Grant lawsuit and all involved in that, you can check out cultaholic.com.